know, it's better at the beginning.
Welcome, everyone, to La Mesa, where educators gather, an early learning STEM podcast created by Pre-K for USA and hosted by the D. Howard International Education Foundation. I'm John Green-Otero, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Sarah Heinrich. Pull up a chair and join us at La Mesa to discuss topics around STEM education in the early childhood setting. Today, we are joined again by the amazing Dr. Katrina Ashworth, who has worked in early childhood sphere for 23 years as a classroom teacher, family advocate, and professional learning specialist here at Pre-K for USA. I get the good fortune of working with her regularly. We actually just left a meeting together. She has expertise in child development, curriculum, presenting, a gambit of a variety of professional learning topics in the early childhood space. We're excited to have you here, Katrina.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you to all our virtual participants. We encourage you to join in the conversation via the chat function located at the bottom of your screen, wherever my hand is pointing. It's just me being silly. And selecting the raise hand icon from the reaction, and Sarah will let us know when you have a question, and we'll make sure to center your voice. Today, we're talking about STEM at home. So, as a leadoff question for all of us, families have so many opportunities for STEM. Right? I mean, life is filled with opportunities for STEM. And families as we like to say in early childhood, families as the first teacher, right? The home becomes the natural first classroom in a sense, right? Or the world becomes the first classroom. As educators, how do we leverage that strength in the classroom and continue the learning that already happens at home? What's that bridge? How do we make sure that connective tissue is strong?
I love that question. I think that going back to what you said too about our parents, families being the first teachers, it's supporting our families where they're at, right? Providing those opportunities, those experiences, those resources, that knowledge, right? I think that's a big piece of what a lot of our families need and want is tell me more about how do I do this, right? It may come kind of naturally to us, but maybe I need to break that down a little bit more and see what that really looks like. Because believe it or not, I think a lot of families and parents are actually already doing these things and don't realize how much I'm already impacting my children, right? So definitely.
I think that's so true. I think that's one of the hardest things. I think about my own journey to becoming a parent. And even though I think about my wife more than I think about myself because I had this benefit of, spending 20 years in early childhood and in education at large and thinking about developmental neuroscience and all these things, right? But watching my wife go through it, the enthusiasm and the natural motivation to want to show up for your child and want to create the best possible, right? You see that all the time in families. And I love when educators center that. I love when systems center that when families show up, they're showing up the best that they can, right? So you sort of push against that deficit mindset that sometimes exists in systems.
Yes.
But I love the framing that you just articulated because it centers this idea that you're already doing this, right? And so in whatever way you want to reflect on it, find ways to amplify it, create greater either language opportunities or even book choice opportunities, whatever it is.
Yes.
You're doing it already.
You are.
So let's not make perfect be the enemy of good.
Exactly. I think the language is a huge one, John.
Yeah.
You're just mentioning the language and reading, kind of just read through resources and thinking back to experiences as an educator, as a parent myself, conversations with teachers out in the field, or with families and children. It just makes me think about how impactful and how meaningful those language interactions can be. So doing them in that authentic way, giving that wait time to children, giving those open-ended opportunities for that exploration to explore. And just maybe let me ask one question and kind of back off and watch what happens. That's beautiful. That's beautiful to watch and see.
Yeah, my favorite, so two things I've really enjoyed watching my son, he's 3 now, growing up is, to your point around language, is when I see him throw things, right? Don't jump to, I do 2 things. Number 1, I say, you got some throwing energy. Let's find something that's a little softer to throw, right? Because there's a difference between throwing something that can break or throwing something that might break something and throwing a plushie, right? Or a ball.
Safety first always.
Safety first always, right? So there's that shift that I always like to remind people. It works every time. It never ceases to fail. That I go, you got throwing energy, buddy. Let's throw this instead, right? And he loves that. It never slows him down. But the other piece is to shift your language to your point around you're exploring how that moves in space, right? To use language like that, the trajectory, the gravity's pull. Oh, it's slowing down, it's speeding up. I wonder why that is. Using language that illuminates things that might spark curiosity and their own internal dialogue. I love when parents are really explicit in that, or when educators, they focus on that.
Yes, that's huge.
And I think that's a space where, as educators, we can really step in to support and do that bridge for families, is because it goes back to that piece of all of the natural things that families are already doing with their children, but they're not necessarily always very aware, or they're not confident
That's right.
in the fact that they're doing it. And giving them a framework, giving them language, pointing out all of the things that they're doing amazingly, so that they have a little more confidence in it, but also this capacity to be more intentional with it, to notice the natural things that they do and go, oh, I am now more aware of what I can do with this opportunity. And in all the readings and all of getting ready for, they had this one, it was notice, name, nurture.
Ooh, I love that.
Which the 3 N's just really hit me right in my core, because it is one of the things that we talk about doing in the classroom, that we talk with families about doing, which is just being aware of those opportunities, putting the language, like you mentioned, to what is occurring, and then doing those open-ended questions. And that breaks it down for families really easily to a digestible thing, to take it from, especially if family is coming from a space where they didn't necessarily have the best relationship with the educational system or the educators, or they're nervous about math or science and their funds of capacity, that it breaks it down to this very manageable thing that they can do with their children in the moment.
I feel that way. Like, I don't know if you all grew up in this sort of philosophy, but I just remember growing up, and in the math and sciences, it was a traditional moment, some point in my career, where it was like, either you're good at it or you're bad at it. Right. And the system sort of indicated it to you too, right? Whether an educator explicitly said, oh, you're good at math, or I've seen you be good at math, as a reinforcement tactic. But it does kind of create this internal notion. My wife is a veterinarian, and she has always been very good at math and science. And so she had very much that core, that then when she got older and realized she wanted to get into veterinary medicine, she was like, oh, well, I'm good at this, so that makes sense. And we hear all the counter arguments all the time where, whether it's young boys or young girls, will hear a negative narrative around their capacity and then go, well, then that path is off, it's closed off to me, even if they never even took a step. Right. And so you've got, I just think about the ways in which I try and remind myself that sometimes I'm showing up with some of that baggage. And so I've got to be really careful around that self-talk too. So there's all that talk directed towards, so much easier, right, to say, oh, I'll do this nice thing for my child. But then you have to catch yourself and go, oh, where am I being a little self-deprecating so that I don't accidentally communicate, well, if daddy thinks he's bad at math, then maybe I am too.
There's some amazingly fascinating research out of Australia that has to do with, it was, just going down the rabbit hole and looking at how do parents view their capacity in STEM and children's capacity in STEM along gender bias, the gender bias of the child and the gender bias of the adult interacting with the child. And just some fascinating places where cognitively, people are demonstrating an awareness that gender does not influence, but still holding those societal biases about what kind of job is appropriate for a specific child. And the differences in perspective, whether you are a mom or a dad, whether the child is a boy or a girl. And it was just, I want to spend some more time just getting to it. But it was really interesting to see, because they'll be, a nurse is an appropriate thing for a female to do and doesn't require a lot of STEM understanding. And all I can think as a child who grew up, my mother was a nurse. I'm like, there's a lot of STEM understanding that goes into being a nurse.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. No, my mom was good.
Yeah, that deficit thinking. I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was and I reflect on this topic specifically, thinking about how I'm raising a son and my daughter, two very different pathways. But I think about to what you were saying, John, about your own experiences as a child and kind of how educators led you down your paths and how certain paths were closed off to you when you really didn't even have ample time to necessarily explore paths. Kind of had that same experience in my own growing up and rendering as well. And my parents did the best, great opportunities, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But now as a parent, to the exact point you say is I stop and reflect with my husband often is we are both educators in the field. So making sure that we're going out and how are we conversating with others in this field, but also too, how are we raising our own children with this mindset of, because I'll admit I would say I'm not a huge fan of math. Like math is hard. Math is a struggle for me, but it's like, I really break that down and I sit in that space, but I need, like, I can do math, like math I'm doing math day to day. Right. So it's kind of undoing that stuff. But now as my children are getting old, luckily I can have conversations with them about that. Tell me about your path and what are you thinking? And that really helps translate into the day-to-day work we do. Because unfortunately we do see that deficit thinking for sure.
No, I agree. I actually think a lot about what the work that bilingual educators are leading around because there's parallels here. One of my favorite things that happened in the last 10 to 15 years as someone who, grew up in a bilingual household, my first language was Spanish, and then I experienced what was pretty traditional for people who grew up in Puerto Rico at the time I grew up in Puerto Rico, is that depending on who was in charge at the governor level or even at the United States level, the English language would either be required by law or Spanish would be like outlawed, for lack of better words. And so there was incredible emphasis on being proficient in the English language, which obviously I am. But lately, they've been doing this really great progressive work to encourage people to understand, whether they're young, old, anywhere in their language journey, that any amount of language acquisition is proficiency. It's you're bilingual just by engaging in it. Now, that doesn't mean that you have the level of proficiency to write a dissertation, right? But it's recognizing that it's an experience. And that at any entry point, you've begun that experience. So it doesn't become a light switch, it becomes kind of a spectrum, right? Yeah. And I really appreciate that in this context too, because I think math learning is similar. We had this sort of conversation recently around math as sort of a language, right? Yes. It's such a great, those of you, go back to that fantastic, oh my goodness, session. That was so great. Katrina, you would have just...
I will have to look for it.
It was so good. But it felt similar. Like, I feel like I went to a certain point where my educators saw me. It was about 8th grade. They were like, "Oh, John, you're amazing at math." And then because for whatever reason, I'm not trying to, hate on the educators I had in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. They weren't the same. They didn't engage the same. They didn't provide me the necessary resources. So by the time I got to college, I was 4 years behind my peers. And so it wasn't that anyone was actively coming at me and saying I'm not allowed, but the system naturally gravitates you towards pathways, right? It naturally says either through test taking or through your own experience. I remember when I first took calculus, I think I cried. But it's this, like, we all want to be successful. We all want to understand. And when you hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, you can naturally also close those things to yourself. And so I think that there's this interesting thing from a mindset shift that we as parents can do and we as educators can do to help children in a similar way that bilingual education is doing this, to say, no, you are a math person, you are a science person, right? And the degree at which you're capable of doing it is only in relationship to your relationship to it, right? Your own, you say 10,000 hours, right? I don't know what the current nomenclature is. But I think that's a more healthy, exciting, because if someone had framed that way for me, I don't think I would have walked away as fast. I mean, I love education. I fell in love with it early on, but who knows? Yeah. I could have been a computer programmer on the side. You never know.
You never know, right?
You never know.
I think it makes me think about and reflect a lot, especially in the spaces that we get the privilege to work in day to day. Right here, and the relationships that we're building with our educators, directors, principals, everybody all over. we are working in this beautiful zero to birth phase, yes. Right? And so we talk a lot about those foundational pieces and, language and reading and writing and all those fun foundational pieces. But it also makes me think about those foundational pieces for families, truly understanding. As an infant, your child is, putting a ball in and out of his mouth. That is that's some curiosity. That's some open opportunity for some exploration and some open questions
right there.
Seriously. Right. So parents understanding the importance of, yes, that's a 1-year-old simply just playing with a ball, but look at all the little pieces that go into that. So helping parents understand that strong positive mindset from the beginning, as you said, mindset, right? And so as they transition into public school, and hopefully that carries on and wherever their path may be, right? That they continue on with that. And it makes me think of that intrinsic motivation piece, right? We all naturally have it in us, have the ability to do it. So,
that's something I personally oscillate here because I get stuck because there's a part of me that wants to go out and design a visual. Mm-hmm. Where at every age, 0 to 8, 0 to 20, 0 to whatever, you see the building blocks of knowledge that lead to organic chemistry, for example. I think sometimes parents don't realize exactly what you just said, don't realize that when a child is exploring with an object, whether it's just putting it in their mouth or picking it up and dropping it 20,000 times, that those are the first experiments that they ever will run. And so in that sense, they are scientists first, right? And so I think that reframing is really powerful. And I think what I can't speak for everyone out there, but I think sometimes parents fall into this place of if you don't see, because it feels so small, the stepping stones. We see them in language acquisition, I think, a little easier because we've communicated pretty aggressively in our culture that, alphabet awareness and then phoneme awareness and, phonetic awareness builds towards word composition, builds towards word, usage. And then so you see these, in education, we call them words. And so these are easily digestible words that then lead to sentence construction, that then lead to language, complex language acquisition. So there's this pretty common path that I think the general person knows. You don't need to be an educator to know. Oh yeah, you put these pieces together, you say ABCs, you get to speaking. But I don't feel that same is true in the math and sciences. You don't hear a little bit more in the numeracy world, but you don't hear what you said a little bit. You just don't, unless you're in it. You don't hear dropping the ball a bunch of times as an infant leads to, observing gravity and observing the basic laws of physics leads to, observing change, an ecosystem. You don't often see a progression laid out. And I wonder if maybe for educators, that's part of what we can help families create. That's not sort of one. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm
create like a 1-page visual.
But even that simple articulation, I could talk to any, non-educator in the street and they'll say some version of oh yeah, your ABCs lead to you speaking. They'll create that relationship. It's just symbols. Yeah. It's just, it's math in a lot of ways. It's symbolism. And so I don't know. I just find myself struck with the way our culture centers that, and it's no surprise to me in our school systems, in our societal norms, that we're seeing, it's getting better, obviously, but we're seeing the slow progression of math compared to literacy dominance.
There's a certain amount of fixation, I think, in the zeitgeist, in the mind of your average person, that it's the end point, right? Is science, what was the product of my experience? Technology, what was the website that I built, or the new game system that I created? Engineering, where's the airplane that I made, or the bridge that I built? And there's this movement in the early STEM space, tinkering, which I love because it is taking all of that away and giving children and families, right? Even the adults engaged in that space, just open-ended materials that you can put together and take apart and do with no end being the fixed point, right? And there's so much of what we do in the classroom that is open-ended exploration of materials, that space of child-directed exploration and play, where we as the adult get an opportunity to step in. And thinking back to previous conversations we've had of being a co-constructor of curiosity and discovery.
All about that process, right?
Right?
Process. We did talk a lot about that with the art conversation. I remember that. I'm laughing as you were giving that example, Sarah, because it's making me think. A couple weeks ago, did a professional learning session for a room full of adults, and they wanted to explore with hands-on loose parts. So it's like sticks and rocks, and it's just it's so much fun, right? That even as adults, we love that, right? That natural just curiosity. What can I do with this, and how can I explore? And no time constraint. Like the wait time, and just watching and listening to the conversations. Like, it's so impactful.
You nailed it for me when you said, like, as you were speaking, I was like, my first adult thought was, at the time.
Right?
You know, like,
Right?
It's always time. But that to me is the gift. I mean, we talked about before, and I'm sure we will talk again about the power of boredom. That could be its own, episode. Exactly. But I think in that space, I just think about myself as a child. If I found a random piece of, we had this, I'm going to sound like an old guy for a second, so I apologize to everyone. I remember a time, I remember when we had like junkyards rather than just a dump. Do you remember that? Do you ever had that? So where I grew up, there was a junkyard. It wasn't a dump in the current sense where there was garbage. It was items that had broken, but people would go there and procure pieces for either vehicles or machines, or whatever. And I would get so excited. I was so, like, when my dad was like going to the dump, I would be just like, oh my God, it's like going to Candyland, right? Because I would often find things and then repair them. And that was a really fun thing. But I remember my first experiences with just the deconstruction space. It was just the permission to take a toaster and take it apart. Now, I didn't always put it back together, but that space of curiosity of what's inside this thing that then led me to what does that little piece do? And then eventually getting to a place of reconstruction and then even potentially repair. And I just find that sometimes, unfortunately, society has shifted in certain ways. I mean, in some ways, tons of really exciting ways, but we spend less time outside. We spend less time doing these kinds of things in community, right? In some ways, that makes a ton of sense considering what we've had to do as a culture. But I think about the loss there of both the boredom and the opportunity to deconstruct and repair things, and what that offered young scientists, what that offered young STEM people when they demystified something. I see funny things all the time of like, imagine if, we got a solar flare and all of our technology died tomorrow. Could any of us recreate this? I definitely couldn't, right? I'm sure there are people who could, but if you think about just how many layers of complex systems exist nowadays, I'd be surprised if we got a simple, engine started, let alone develop a satellite and then, a telephone system.
You think about all of the pieces that are involved in something like that. I remember in a classroom, we used to take remotes, just dead remotes and screwdrivers, and be like, what can you do? What can you do? And the fascination that would go into that exploration. And it also makes me think about the outdoor adult-free playgrounds they have in the British Isles. They have.
Tell me about that.
So,
how about that?
They're beautiful.
If I recall correctly, about how it came about was post-World War II. They had all of these exploded, destroyed spaces, and they turned them into parks where you have adults who stay on the periphery of what is occurring in the space as sort of like safety monitors and facilitators, but who don't actively engage with what children are going on. So they have all of those things that you would find in a dump. Broken buildings and boards and, metal bits, and just creating everything from scratch. The play structures, the games, just children and junk and a space.
Yes.
And seeing what they would.
And I think you just defined my childhood.
How fun. How fun. I was inside building the forts, guys. Surely remember the forts with the sheets and the pillows. Oh my God, I love them.
Yeah.
It's like such a powerful and I
One of my favorite memories of trying to create myself.
Looking for videos of my kids when they were little and just how much planning would go into that. But bringing cardboard like into a classroom, oh my gosh, they were entertained with that cardboard for hours. And then when it finally falls apart, well, what can we do with the cardboard? What's the next
Cardboard and duct tape.
Oh, I'm telling you, they love it. It's cheap.
It's cheap.
Right?
Yep. Easy to get. Dollar store pretty easily.
Exactly.
And I think things like that, making families more aware of the capacities that they already have at their fingertips that they may not necessarily have been like, oh, because they are working parents, right? You don't always have time to think that through. Yeah. But educators, that's the space we live in. Yeah. That's where our time is. Yeah. And so sharing that with families, making an obstacle course, baking, right? Like I think about how much science is involved.
Chemistry.
Cooking.
Yep. Yes.
Right? This baking is science for hungry people.
Yep.
Yes.
That's why I love Alton Brown as an adult.
Yeah.
I love when, I remember my mother's a big cook. I never was a big cook. But I remember watching Alton Brown for the first time and listening to him talk about food through a science lens. I was like,
wow.
And that's all it took. And then I fell in love with it. But I'm with you. I think there's so many fun ways to engage in the day-to-day back to that point. I think there's lots of resources that exist that are cheap or free, that either if you need ideas, the internet has them, educators in your life have them. I think the library is an amazing resource. We got this series of books for my son, who's named Darwin, by the way, which is, I feel like I had to say that since we're talking about,
science.
Who was just like astrophysics for babies, right? Mm-hmm. Neuroscience for babies. And the other day, we were going to pick up books before we were going to bed, and he goes in his adorable little baby voice, he's like, astrophysics, which is the first time I've heard him say astrophysics. And so you just think about who knows where that takes him, who knows where it goes, but it's back to that point of I want to open as many doors as possible so that he can choose which ones he chooses to walk through, right? And I think, this is one of our questions we have here, but we touched on it naturally, is working with the educators in your life, working with the people who already have the resources free, readily available at your library, or even nonprofits. There are nonprofits out there. Museums. Oh my goodness, yes, great. If you've got museums in your community, I know there are tons of great machines. I drive by the Air Force Museum all the time, and my son is always like, "Oh my God,
that's cool.
Helicopters."
That's a cool museum.
Such a cool one. So I think that there's just tons of resources in your community. So time is of course a factor, but back to the point you made, get some cardboard, get some duct tape, and just create the space and
see what happens.
Less is more in that regard.
You mentioned something interesting, Sarah, that makes me think on how we can help support families, right, with this, because we know it is naturally already happening, and just kind of pointing out and highlighting those things for them to see. I also think about, though, the risky play. The risky play, right, and the hesitation that we naturally may have as an educator, as a parent, whatever role we're in, and I don't want to do that. So that's a huge one to think about, right? Is how can we help, again, families feel comfortable and confident with this could be risky to work with a battery, batteries or a remote or a flashlight. There's some nervousness with that. Even scissors, like the use of scissors with a 3-year-old, right? I could see that.
I want to tell you a funny little story. So again, because I had this background, I was doing this very intentionally. I think Sarah might have told you this, but I was over at my sister's place, and my sister has an 8-year-old daughter. And you know how young people are; they love to criticize, they love to comment, comment. And so this is when my son was just learning to walk, just learning to climb, and so she had this little home play space, wood, and he learns, I can climb this, right? And the good early childhood educator in me did not stop him. I stood close by, and I saw that he was taking safe, methodical choices with his movements. He wasn't being sort of wild with his movements.
A lot of risk assessment.
And so he was carefully climbing up this thing. My niece, of course, looks at me and is like, "Oh, you you're not doing your job as a parent. Like you better. So I was right next to him, of course. But it's this interesting space that I think highlights the differences in experiences where, because I was aware of the power of risky play, the power of risk assessment, and then we chose language, back to your first recommendation at the start of our conversation. Instead of saying, be careful, I say, what's your plan? Right? To the point where he now, as he's doing things that have a little bit of a risk element, I'll literally hear him say, what's my plan? To himself. His self-talk is starting, which is what you want to hear, right? But those subtle frames, of course, I'm standing right next to him.
Right.
Of course, I'm there to catch him if he slips. But I don't want to prevent his own self-confidence development so that he knows he can trust himself when he makes a decision. Because, right, the alternative is he never tests himself. He never explores. He never sees what he's capable of. And he develops, not that this is necessarily a correlation, but develops a fear of any kind of risk.
Becomes risk averse.
Right.
Or gets to a point where he's no longer receiving that regular external boundary and jumps off a roof or something.
Right. I saw this funny thing that happened in college with some international children. Well, at the time they were 18, right? These international peers of mine who were coming in from other countries that were like really strict countries. And they were wild. Like nothing dangerous, but they were just smoking and drinking and partying. They were the loudest people on the campus. And I remember reflecting on, wow, so like that's the other side of creating these hyper strict, is that once you release that, there's no sense of, well, what might be an appropriate way in which I approach a new experience when I'm going to go 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And then I have to deal with that consequence. So I think that there's something to be said about being intentional as a parent, that sometimes, not always, sometimes preventing your child from safely exploring something is actually a long-term might, make them jump too quickly to your point, Sarah.
Yeah, it's not a question of letting them do whatever without any restraints. It's not a question of shutting them down all the time.
Right.
It's about finding that balance.
Balance.
Wayne had a quick question.
Oh, I love questions. Wayne.
So this will show my ignorance of the subject, so I apologize for that. I've always focused my community service locally, nationally, internationally on underserved kids. My first job out of undergraduate school was teaching in Head Start and going to the homes of the kids and talking to the parents, most of which at that time, this was in Edgewood School District 55, 60 years ago. Most of the families didn't speak English, but they loved their kids just as much as people with money loved their kids. There's a disparity between the life experiences, possibly educational level, possibly, of the caregivers in one home versus another, which I suspect is part of the reason behind at pre-K for SA going to birth to second grade to get the kids in the pre-K environment so they won't fall behind at any age level. Well, but now we're talking about what can be done at home, and so I'm curious as to how we reach out to those families in their homes, taking into consideration their different availabilities in far as two parents working or working more than one job at different shifts, etc. I certainly agree, not that means anything, 1,000% with focusing this on the home, but how do we implement that? I guess is my question. How do we reach those families? How do we provide them with resources that they can access? Maybe they don't have computers. Most people have cell phones, but maybe they don't. But when we were in the middle of COVID, some school districts in San Antonio put internet access on school buses, and
That's right.
but now we're talking about, getting the families engaged in this work with their kids to uplift the kids. So I'm sort of interested in the nitty gritty of how do we do that? Is it through the churches? Is it from other nonprofits? Is it through the internet access? How do we empower the caregivers to be able to do what you're talking about?
It's a fantastic question, and obviously I'm not going to take the whole space for answering the question, but I just want to plug that, that's actually part of the core of why Pre-K4SA exists. Wayne, you know this. Our job is more than just our centers and our partnerships. It's looking at opportunities for every child, and I mean every child, across Bexar County, across San Antonio, and hopefully across the state of Texas, to get the kind of high quality experience necessary that we know is transformative, that we know will create both the neurological infrastructure necessary for them to reach their fullest potential, but also create the discrete experiences necessary for them to, thoughtfully engage in the world, ask themselves powerful questions, create powerful relationships, do the things that we know will help them meet a future that is hard for us adults to even imagine, right? And so to ask future generations to engage in the challenges that we can't even imagine is a daunting task, to say the least. But we believe early childhood is one of the strongest mechanisms to create the neurological and emotional infrastructure necessary to meet that. So that's sort of my big push and plug for programs like Pre-K4SA. And I can get into the weeds around, the work that Katrina and I and Sarah and I do to create the concrete structures across San Antonio to support them, right? Katrina works directly with our providers across San Antonio's early childhood ecosystem. Sarah and I work together looking at the innovation and system structural components to say, how do we bring either curriculum innovations or process innovations to scale, right? How do you change systems, not just an individual's experience, right? And so your question is beautiful and comprehensive in the sense that it's not just one answer. It's a comprehensive series of answers. It's a yes and, for lack of a better word. It's meeting. One of the things I love about family education and family engagement these days is it's really about funds of knowledge and not looking at families as deficits in any way, but seeing them that they're showing up the best possible way. They're doing the best possible thing they can. And so we just need to meet them knowing that they're fighting a system that is incredibly hard, knowing that they are, to your point, working 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table, knowing that both parents are having to work, and therefore any way we can help them, whether it's a workforce development conversation or a continuing education conversation, to have opportunities to get more money into the household so they can create more opportunities. It's all those things, right? And so the more we can be innovative around these kinds of solutions that both directly serve children, right? Our program directly serves children and provides them with those resources, but also creates the conditions that more programs can exist like that and works in partnership with the nonprofits that you're talking about and other organizations. So it's a.
So if I could just interject before Katrina and Sarah jump in, because I want them to. So D. Howard International is a national program and primarily focused on rural schools. Of course, I'm a huge fan, as you all know, of Pre-K4SA and everything you do and all the amazing people you have doing it. And my goal in establishing this relationship on early childhood with Pre-K4SA is to share all of your brilliance, and I mean that literally, with the rest of the country that are could use your knowledge, but thinking about, well, how can we adapt the answer to my question to rural communities that have different challenges and in fact, in other resources. There's I just read an article a couple of days ago. I'll send it to y'all about the strength and resources of rural communities, the fundamental strength of which is the sense of community and everyone being there for each other, or maybe a lot of the rural communities are agricultural. So in terms of the home education of the kids, STEM education of kids in the homes, I'll be honored to listen to your comments about that or anything else.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's definitely a good question. It is a very layered, complex question, which is good, right? We love getting into those spaces and kind of digging that apart. I think we're on the right track. We've got some good ideas. I think every year we have these conversations. Family is huge, right? It makes me think about what you just mentioned, John, funds of knowledge. It's like I wrote it and you said it and I was like, yeah, funds of knowledge, right? Because every family has strengths to bring to the table. And I think us really focusing in on those funds of knowledge, those strengths, basically that families are bringing to that table, and getting their voices heard. Families want that, figuratively speech, spot at the table, right? They want that seat at the table. They want to be involved in, just as you said, Wayne, right? The families and the parents love their children, right? And want the best for them. So giving them that active voice, meeting them where they're at, because our families are so unique and diverse. So that's huge. I think for me, one question that kind of comes to mind a lot, and I have this conversation a lot with the directors that I'm working with now, is what barriers exist for your families and how can we help reduce those barriers? So that's kind of an open-ended conversation, and it's not to be answered overnight. It's just kind of one of those continuous, like, let's look at this. What's a barrier? What's happening? And it could be a lot of different things. So it just depends, right? It's those unique family dynamics that our society brings to the table, right? It's just so beautifully made up. We're a very huge melting pot here, for sure. So that's what I think of.
I think that's right. And, one of the things that, back to my earlier point that I didn't highlight, but I wanted to just to connect it really strongly to what you're asking, Wayne, is Pre-K for SA is working through its Venture Solutions arm and moving into other communities that are rural. We can't operate because of the way we're funded, but, outside of our jurisdiction. So we have to create strategic partnerships that can offset the cost of our time so that we can work in Permian Basin is one of those examples where you have a huge swath of Texas landscape that is predominantly rural. And the challenge for us as we look at early childhood experiences there is, one, a unique business challenge of how do you operate an early childhood center with, a radius that can be 100 miles, and the challenge of that, as well as, to your point, a resource distribution and allocation model. And so what we're exploring in that space hopefully will add to this conversation thoughtfully for both work that we do together, Wayne, but also the larger context that I think almost every community, I know when I've talked to my arts integration friends, are also thinking about how do we get more arts to rural communities? How do we get more STEM education to rural communities? How do we get more, just education to rural communities? But it does, like you're sort of illuminating, it's about starting with what is the lived experience of those communities, because they live just to the exact point we made at the onset of this, is that STEM is existing in their life. You pointed it out with the chickens and even just the maintenance of land. Caretaking land is an incredibly STEM-rich experience. Yeah. There is chemistry happening all the time. There's biology happening all the time. There's geology. Oh my goodness, all the time. And because these communities often do struggle with degrees of poverty, the resourcefulness of those communities and the connectedness of those communities becomes a critical component of their success. or at least their ability to survive. And so, yes, part of what I was trying to say was a yes and was yes, churches, yes, community organizations, yes, nonprofits, yes, the internet, yes to all of the above, because I think that what we're facing is the opportunity cost of not doing anything. What we're facing is what happens when we don't support all of these brilliant young people, brilliant families from getting access to resources, and their context doesn't get centered in some future scenario, right? I mean, it's depending on who you're talking to, AI can be a bad word because of the way it's changing our society so rapidly. But I think empowering those families with the opportunities to understand what is and is not that experience, what is not that opportunity for any piece of technology, let alone AI, is going to help shape their community in a way that they get to decide rather than letting someone else decide it for them, rather than imposing that because they don't have an opportunity. So I'm with you. I think that's the heart of what you're articulating, Wayne, which is, let's do everything. Let's attempt every possible course of action.
And I think to tie into that, we talked a lot about these macrocosms, these larger systems. But the complement to that is the micro. That is educators having a relationship with their families,
yep,
and families having a relationship with their child. And so that I, as a teacher, know that Joey's mom has told me how much he is into taking things apart and putting them together. And I know that Susie's dad works as a mechanic down the road. And so now I have this opportunity to sort of bring family strengths in or connect families with one another. And now, Susie, who's into gardening, is working with Joey's mom. And being aware of the strengths that they bring into the space and helping serve as that community connector in those spaces, in addition to having the leverage of these larger systems that we talk about. And so, they may be under-resourced in stuff, but they're over-resourced in natural facilities, or they may be, whatever it is that they have in abundance, finding ways to use that to their advantage. And it's, the network that the T. Howard Foundation has put together with the website that we are currently being hosted on, is one of those network communication pieces that I think is important. And the more teachers are aware, the more they can help families be aware of the resources that may or may not be available to them and that they may be able to access.
I agree.
So,
I mean, this opportunity alone, I think, is wonderful, and it's hopefully more rural educators are having an opportunity to sit and have these conversations. Perhaps there's opportunities to provide scholarships or professional learning collaborations where we can come together with them and sit down and talk about the unique challenges so we can center their voice in coming up with solutions. Because, that's the hardest thing is you can come up with ideas all the time, but if it doesn't work within the flow of that community, within the flow of that experience, then it's yet another burden. It's yet another thing I have to do. And so, I hope that this opportunity you've created for us, Wayne, through the D. Howard Foundation, is going to reach out to more people and hopefully create enough buzz, enough excitement that we can start to collaborate really meaningfully, because it's something that I think we're all passionate about and we all see the value of.
We're fortunate and blessed to have many wonderful relationships with wonderful people. But one of the largest megaphones that we have is with the National Rural Education Association, which is the executive director is Dr. Melissa Sardoff, who was a superintendent of a rural community near Tucson, Arizona, was the executive director of the Arizona Rural Schools Association, and is now the executive director of we refer to as NREA. And we're blessed to have to be a strategic partner with National Rural Education Association. So they're very much aware of what we're doing. And when I ask if they will share some of what we're doing with them on through their network, they do it. So I think and we've just started a new initiative, also growing out of a dialogue with a rural school in Arizona. It's called the National Rural Schools Innovation Lab Initiative. And that's getting a lot of traction. And I think because it seems to be pulling all of the resources that we've put together over the last 5 years into a very focused space, and how to integrate all of these ideas. And as a result, we've increased our communication tools, including tools that will allow schools that are participating in our initiatives to communicate one-on-one directly with each other. And that was done at the request of a school in Vermont. And so I'm not promoting what we're doing, but I'm saying that we do have a pretty good infrastructure in place to spread the word.
I think this is an exciting opportunity. That's why we're here. That's why we love it. That's why we think it's going to be great for local and rural and national parties, all the same.
So you want to say goodbye, John?
Yes.
Wrap it up?
On that beautiful note, we want to hear from you all. What are your thoughts on STEM at home, and what would you like to talk about next? That's my call to action to everyone watching. Thank you all so much for tuning into our talks and joining. And please remember to join us every third Thursday of the month to be part of the conversation. Thank you again to Dr. Ashworth and to Sarah, my co-host. And thank you all. Thank you, Wayne.